Hello, everyone. Amber Johnson, PhD, is an assistant professor at St. Louis University. She teaches intercultural communication, human communication and culture, intergroup dialogue, first year dialogue, stereotyping and bias in the mass media, global media, and photojournalism. She has a Bachelor of Arts, a Master of Arts, and a doctorate, all in communications. Dr. Johnson caught my attention when I came across a video of her promoting a social justice project that she has, quite literally, taken out on the road. And combining that with a video covering some of how she teaches her students, it all makes for a very interesting chain of ideas and proposals. So, join me now as I take you on a journey of empathy and forgiveness, social justice style.
My name is Dr. Amber Johnson, and I teach intercultural communication and critical cultural studies courses. I have three lines of research, three primary lines. The first one is on art activism and social justice, and I am building a fleet of social justice trucks called the Justice Fleet.
The Justice Fleet. The first time I heard that, I immediately thought of superheroes, of course.
Of course!
But also with the foreknowledge that our speaker has a doctorate in communications, I also thought that it was a very declarative way to describe her project. I mean, who could argue against something designed to deliver justice? And if anyone did, how might such a dissenter be perceived?
And the first truck will center on radical forgiveness. So how can we use forgiveness as public policy in our interpersonal lives, in systemic ways, in order to create change and dialogue around prejudice and bias?
Forgiveness as public policy. I'm not really sure what that means, but it does sound very virtuous. Let's take a look at the video promoting the Justice Fleet, and we will return to our speaker's other areas of focus afterwards.
The Justice Fleet is a mobile social justice museum that fosters healing through art, dialogue, and play.
A mobile museum fostering healing through art, dialogue, and play. Okay, art. What sort of art? And dialogue. I assume that means two-way conversations? And play. What sort of play? And all of that being geared towards healing. So, I guess the primary question is, what is the wound that is in need of healing?
The Justice Fleet was founded as a means to help people not only deal with systemic oppression and think about critically imaginative ways to fix systemic issues, but also how to heal from those traumas.
Aha! So the wound is the trauma caused by systemic oppression. All right? So how does a mobile museum heal trauma? And what systems are we talking about? And who is being oppressed? And if the oppression is systemic, it's ingrained and perpetual, how exactly can anyone ever heal from what has to be an ongoing and permanent trauma?
So we start with radical forgiveness, which we ask people to paint their bias and ask for forgiveness, or paint how others have been biased towards them and grant forgiveness.
Paint their biases and ask for forgiveness, or paint how others have been biased towards them and grant forgiveness. Okay. Ask for forgiveness from whom exactly? Who is granting the forgiveness to the painter. Alternately, having the painter grant forgiveness to those who have been biased towards them. Okay, now, I will admit my own bias when it comes to granting forgiveness, because in my experience, a granting of forgiveness without first receiving an offer of remorse from the offender is effectively providing someone an unearned gift, and does little to settle the matter, at least to me. But that little bit of philosophy aside, this exercise presumes either the inherent guilt of the painter and/or that the painter inherently already has been a target. The participant is already either a villain or a victim or both. Let's remember that notion.
And what this does is inspires dialogue around healing from those traumas associated with racial tension, with sexism, trans misogyny, all of these sort of social issues that are constantly re-traumatizing people.
Racism, sexism, trans misogyny. Those are just some, I have to assume there are others, of the kinds of oppressions that this project hopes to help heal the trauma of, by having participants paint their personal sins or those hardships they feel have been inflicted upon them by others, and then talking about them. Got it.
So yeah, we basically reach out to community partners and stakeholders in our communities, community organizations like libraries, parks, schools, adult daycares, shelters, and then we come in for 1 to 2 hours. We pop up our signs or we pop out our boxes and we play and we make art with people and we just talk.
Libraries, parks, schools, adult daycares, and shelters. You know, that sounds like several vulnerable and/or impressionable populations there. And through a 1 to 2 hour session, the Justice Fleet promotes forgiveness, either asking for it or granting it in order to heal trauma from systemic oppressions. Got it.
One of the biggest things that we're trying to teach through our pop-ups with the Justice Fleet is empathy.
My life matters. I'll forgive when it does. A Black woman. You know, that sounds like the making of an endless, unresolvable grudge to me. But setting that aside, I would like to focus on the primary statement of that last part.
One of the biggest things that we're trying to teach through our pop-ups with the Justice Fleet is empathy.
Teaching empathy. That phrase, and iterations similar to it, have been used in many of the lectures and presentations I have covered in the past, and oftentimes I will make comment on them when they occur. But given that our speaker is a qualified expert in communications, I feel it's necessary for me to dig a bit deeper into what I hear when someone uses a phrase like that. So, if you'll humor me, imagine this scenario. I come up to you and say, "Hello, I'd like to take a few minutes to convince you of this good idea of mine." Now, what does that interaction automatically do? What power dynamic is immediately established? Well, I have placed the responsibility on myself, the speaker, to do the work to convince you, the listener, of the value of my idea. And I have consequently placed the power of assessment of the value of my idea in your hands. But what if I approached you this way? "Hello, I'm here to teach empathy, so I'd like to take a few minutes to tell you about this idea of mine." Now, what does that interaction do? Well, to my mind, it sets up the inverse. In this instance, there is no question as to the value of my idea because it is an idea promoting empathy. And what is empathy? Oh, just the foundationary concept behind human compassion and the concept of justice. That's all. So now that I've pre-established that my idea is an element of an inarguable good, the question becomes whether or not you possess empathy. The power dynamic becomes one where you, the listener, has to then convince me, the speaker, of your inherent goodness by agreeing with me. I am here to teach empathy is both a declaration of presumed fact as well as an implicit accusation of anyone listening. It is a very clever use of words because it stifles debate even before the conversation has begun.
And for us, empathy, there's multiple levels of empathy, right?
Right?
So there's a physical empathy that you can't teach, wherein someone can physically feel how someone else feels, right?
Right?
Right. Either you have it or you don't. So, how shall we prove to our speaker whether or not we are inherently flawed as human beings?
And this is a very high level of empathy, and this is something that you either have it or you don't, right?
Right?
But then there's a more entry level of empathy that says, can I be cognizant of my bias, right?
Right?
Can I think about how my biases are informing the way I'm seeing this other person, and then put them to the side? Because the truth of the matter is we cannot not be biased, but we can be mindful of our bias.
Yes, we are all biased. We are all infected with incorrect thoughts and ideas. The question is whether or not you're an empathetic enough person to acknowledge and confess your sins so that you may live a righteous life of self-pity. Got it.
Can I put them to the side then and try to understand this person from their perspective? Can I put them in the center of their narrative instead of myself in the center, and then understand what they are going through, how they are feeling, how they are moving through the world from their center?
So having bias, whether racist, sexist, or trans-misogynistic, which we all possess in some fashion, of course, equates to one lacking empathy. And the way to learn empathy is to diminish yourself while centering all of your focus on someone who is the unwitting victim of your incorrect thinking. So, if you beg forgiveness of God, I mean, of the oppressed, then you may be granted salvation, but only if you want it badly enough, as determined by Jesus. I mean, the oppressed.
So for me, empathy just looks like attempting to understand somebody from their own sources of judgment, their own sources of pain, their own sources of history and experiences instead of ours, right?
Right?
Because as long as we're using our viewpoint, our worldview, we will never see them as fully whole, fully human, fully complex, because they'll never be us, right?
Right?
Right. Unless I assume to know what someone else's life and experiences are, and unless I reject and diminish my own thoughts, perspectives, and experiences as being inherently detrimental to being an empathetic person, I will see everyone else as less than human. Well, golly, I don't ever want to be as horrible a person as our speaker has described, so I guess the only way to be a good person is to agree with what she says. Got it.
So it's this idea that we have to understand people from their perspective, and how they walk through the life in their shoes.
Well, that's the end of the Justice Fleet promotion. I think we learned quite a lot there. But there is more to see in the other topics of focus that our speaker works on. So, first we had the Justice Fleet. What's next?
My second line of research is on identity negotiation and storytelling and media, or the performative possibilities of social media. So how do we use storytelling and narratives to foster dialogue in our interpersonal interactions online?
Well, okay. On the surface of it, that actually sounds like an interesting line of inquiry. It is very true that the internet in general, and social media in particular, is drastically altering the way in which people interact. So, our speaker gets a tentative nod from me on that one.
And then my third line of research is on transfuturism.
Okay, I'll bite. What is transfuturism? Well, now, isn't that interesting? The very first search result I get on this term is from the Justice Fleet website, while the third entry comes to us from the wonderland that is Tumblr. Golly, you'd almost think that this was a concept wholly created by our speaker. Transfuturism is a photography, oral history, and art activism project that utilizes Afrofuturistic art to render the lives of Black, trans, and gender non-conforming folk complex and visible. Well, I am mightily confused as to why a specific race is being combined with concepts of gender identity. Unless this project specifically excludes all other races from consideration, I suppose.
So I look at how we perform gender.
How we perform gender. Got it.
And how certain types of gender embodiment are really pushing the boundaries of gender.
The boundaries of gender. Well, you're either male or female. You express yourself either in a masculine way, a feminine way, or some combination thereof. Even if you're completely androgynous, all that means is that you're neither appearing or necessarily expressing yourself as a man or a woman. But you still remain biologically male or female regardless. If transfuturism involves non-binary people, then you have already set the boundaries with that whole binary thing.
And bleeding into what looks more like Afrofuturism, or a future without colonization, without demonization and dehumanization.
No. Afrofuturism is the exploration of the intersection of African culture with technology, combining science fiction, historical fiction, Afrocentrism, and magic realism. It is a race-based genre of art and media. It is not a utopian ideal of a world without demonization. Otherwise, why would it be called Afrofuturism?
Once you are aware of how social injustice impacts specific people, specific communities, specific institutions, it's really hard to sit and do nothing.
Once you have been shown the reality of the devil's work from someone as enlightened as I, it is difficult not to feel the pull to do God's work and rid the world of sin.
And so I'm extremely passionate about making a difference, using the classroom to inspire others to want to make a difference. So giving people the tools to be able to see the inequities and inequalities that exist in the world, and then giving people the passion and the desire to go out and change them. That's extremely important to me.
Yes, a mobile fleet delivering a presumptive message of moral rectitude to the heartless masses. Indoctrinating students into seeing themselves as either victims of, or villains complicit with, the systems of oppression that obviously surround us, and then sending these newly minted activists forth to become change-makers, to reshape themselves and those around them to conform with a guilt-based ideology that only seeks to teach empathy and to encourage forgiveness. But rather than empathy and forgiveness, this project and its creator, from my perspective, only help to promote shame and to validate anger. A motorcade of maliciousness rather than a convoy of compassion. So be on the lookout, true believers. The Justice Fleet might be coming to your town soon. And if so, please do make sure to forgive them. As always, thank you for watching.